In a bid to boost confidence in its major asset, which is land, Lagos State government has reduced time for registering property and also for obtaining construction permits. The state has consolidated all payments, fees, and taxes for property registration into a single demand notice with the aim of making doing business in the state a lot easier and hopefully even more affordable. Omosuyi Temitope, investment at Strategist with Afrinvest Securities Limited, joins us now to discuss further. Omosuyi, good morning to you. I want to start with Lagos. What do you make of the efforts to reduce the hurdles around property registration?
All right, thank you for having me. One of the challenges around, ease of doing business is land registration. It's one of the sub-indices of ease of doing business. And the challenges revolve around the procedure, the time, and the cost of land registration. So I think it's a very good step for the state government to begin to look at how these challenges is resolved. Because you know that by the Land Use Act of 1978, the governor has authority to determine what the land of a particular state to be used for. So, and one of the challenges we have in Nigeria is still the real estate space. And we know that prior Q4 2020 and Q1 2021, the sector had been in the negative territory since 2016 economic recession. So I think it's a good step, and it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you. You mentioned the Land Use Act. Governor Sanwo-Olu tackled the land use charge early in his administration. Taking a wider view, should the Land Use Act be reviewed, in your view?
Act has to be dynamic and reflective of economic reality, development. For instance, in Dubai, everybody likes what is happening in Dubai in terms of the real estate sector, and is a function of the Land Use Act in that country, in that region, because government allows free land usage, although there's some restriction. But I think so the Land Use Act is, like I told you, is one of the challenges around ease of doing business. So I think it has to be innovative, that is, reflects reality, so that we don't just limit it to what was put together maybe some 10, 15 years ago. We need it to reflect reality. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges around the real estate sector is the Land Use Act and the land tenure system and a number of other factors. So I think this is a very good decision at this point in time.
Well, what's the impact of the bottlenecks around real estate in Nigeria and land?
Well, the hurdles revolve around from the supply side. It's increased the difficulties around getting land to build houses, and sadly, we already know that there's high level of housing deficit in Nigeria. We are looking at about 17 to 20 million house deficit, or the housing deficit. Lagos State alone account for about 3 million of this total housing deficit. That's about 10%. So if other housing deficit rates are evenly distributed across states, so we are talking about 3% housing deficit across other states, while Lagos State alone account for about 3%, which is very, very huge. Does it mean that we don't really have supply? Though there are still issues around vacancy factor index, that is vacancy in highbrow area. If you go to the likes of Lekki and all the highbrow area, so which brings to bear the issues around affordability, because if there are issues around the land that's added to the cost of building a house, then affordability will continue to remain a concern. For instance, let me just take you through these little statistics. In 2019, MBS released a report around Nigerian consumption pattern. They said about 405 billion was spent on rent, right? So let's just do a quick estimation. So if you do, Nigerian household is about 5 persons per household. If you divide that by 200 million, so we're talking about 20 million people, right? Divided by the total rent. So it's telling you that Nigerians can only afford about 40,000 naira for rent per annum. And where do you want to get that kind of house in Lagos or some areas that are actually attractive for most people? So addressing issue around Land Use Act will reduce some of the cost around a housing problem in Nigeria, because housing deficit is still a problem. We have deficit supply of affordable housing.
Thank you so much for that. In terms of interest rates on mortgages, cost of building materials, affordable housing scheme, How much work is left in the real estate sector when you compare it to power and infrastructure and other pressing issues in Nigeria?
Well, all of these factors you have actually mentioned are very, very important. From the interest rate around mortgage, we're looking at over 20% interest, although we know that the government is using the National Housing Fund and the mortgage institution to address these challenges. But we know that this rate is still quite high. Looking at the current per capita income in Nigeria, we are looking at just less than 3,000 per capita income, $3,000. So meaning people are still very poor. So from the supply side, considering the cost of financing to legislation, regulation, and other challenges, that will continue to accentuate the challenges around affordability. So in the real estate space, generally, affordability is the major problem, and affordability comes from both the demand and supply side. From the demand side, you've mentioned those factors. From the supply side, we have also reviewed it as well. Issues around interest rates and laws, rule, bureaucratic system, and all of those things.
Thank you so much. Quick take. What's your? How do you see things working out in Uganda with this IMF loan facility extension that's been granted to them?
Well, it's quite good that at this particular time, Uganda is getting kind of relief. But I would want to say that it's not all about getting the relief, but it's all about addressing holistic approach to checking the fiscal stance. It's not because we know in Nigeria at some point we also got debt relief, right? Now we are looking at about debts of over 30 trillion naira. So it's not all about looking at addressing just getting debt relief for about 3 years, but the government has to look at addressing the fiscal problem, because currently, over a decade now, Uganda has been battling with a huge trade deficit, and has continued to take a toll on the country's foreign reserve as well as its exchange rate. Its exchange rate went up from about 2,500 to over 3,500 last year. That's within just 5 years, from 2015 to 2020. So it shows that the external trade position of that country is still greatly challenged. So if there's going to be a kind of relief now, we know that when these issues are not addressed, there's still going to be some form of fiscal challenges in the future, because the country still depend heavily on commodities like every other African countries. The country depend on coffee rather. Over 30% of its export earnings from coffee, and you know that as a result of the lockdown, a lot of people could not go to bars, take coffee and all. So it affected the country's fiscal policy in terms of inflows for fiscal obligation. So I think this is good. But going forward, what will happen in Uganda is the government ready to address the structure of fiscal policy, addressing the real sector so as to get sustainable inflow and ensure that other obligations that will fall due will also be met as at when due.
Fantastic stuff. Omosuyi Temitope, investment strategist with Afrinvest Securities Limited. Thank you so much for taking us through the Lagos State government trying to tackle hurdles around property registration and also the IMF extending a facility to Uganda. Appreciate your insights as always, Omosuyi.